Hi all, this is part 2 of week 1 of RPSE 465. We learned a little bit about behavioral theory of language acquisition, and I'm going to transition into the nativist theory. Noam Chomsky in the mid to late 60s and others developed the nativist syntactic theory of language acquisition, partly in response to behavioral theory of language acquisition. In developing this theory, Chomsky noted several interesting phenomena. First, it seemed highly unlikely to him that 4-year-old children could have learned all the language they knew simply by being exposed to it and remembering what they heard. The memory load required for such a feat would seem well beyond that available to a child. Second, Chomsky noted the universality of language. That is, he pointed out that language is learned by people of all cultures, in all environments, in similar stages. Moreover, language appears to be unique to humans. Third, it seemed clear to Chomsky that all children were doing more than memorizing chunks of language. They were also learning language rules. This idea actually fascinated him and really was the focus of his work. This point is evident in many of the cute but often revealing mistakes that children make as they're learning language. Putting these pieces of information together, Chomsky concluded that language must be innate, hence the nativist label. Language, according to Chomsky, is inborn in the human species, hardwired at birth. Babies are born ready to learn language. As Steven Pinker in the early 90s pointed out, he's one of Chomsky's followers, language is not a cultural artifact that we learn the way we learn to tell time or how the federal government works. Instead, it's a distinct piece of the biological makeup of our brains. Not only are children born ready to learn, but they also possess a mechanism that Chomsky called the language acquisition device, LAD, which consists of basic grammatical categories and rules that are common to all languages, a linguistic black box, if you will. In order for the LAD to operate, the child must merely be exposed to language. The quality of the adult language does not really matter, nor do the adults have to actively teach or reinforce language use. After a child's exposure to language input, the child's language acquisition device will take over to help them discover the underlying rules of language. Once the rules are mastered and a certain amount of vocabulary is acquired, the child will be able to understand and produce language. The exact nature of the language acquisition device and its physical location continues to be debated, but the idea that there is this built-in human mechanism for language acquisition continues to be a powerful theory. The nativist syntactic theory addresses some of the unexplained phenomena associated with language acquisition. The nativist theory attempts to explain the universality of language as stemming from an inborn bias to learn language rules. The language acquisition device explains how children learn language rules merely by being exposed to language, that babies are programmed from birth to search out and discover the rules or generalizations of language. The theory also accounts for the speed with which language is acquired, since it points out that children are able to process rules right from birth. Although the linguistic or nativist model helps us understand significant limitations to this theory, one of the most troublesome aspects is the diminished role given to language input. If mere exposure to language were all that was needed for language acquisition, why would parents continue to go through the trouble of altering their language for children? We saw that in the Deb Roy Birth of a Word video. The changes naturally that seem to occur in the utterances of adults in response to those of the child. In addition, there is evidence that although caregivers may not be explicitly teaching language rules, they do correct their child's language so-called errors by modeling the correct structure. These results call into question the innateness of language and suggest a more important role for input than the nativist model generally recognizes. A second problem with this model stems from the theoretical underpinnings of the model itself. Chomsky was interested in explaining the acquisition of syntax or grammar or structure in children. He was much less interested in explaining the acquisition of other elements of language. Think of our three overlapping circles: form, content, use. He was less interested in content and use than he was in form. Although the theory, nativist theory, adequately explains the acquisition of syntax, it does not account for the child's acquisition of semantic, morpho-phonological, or pragmatic rules. Finally, the nativist theory poses a dilemma to those who are interested in helping children improve their language performance, as it seems to suggest that there is little hope for children experiencing significant difficulty with language. If language is innate, perhaps these children simply lack the ability to learn language. However, we know from experience, supported by research, that it is possible to enhance language skills. Therefore, there must be more to language learning than this biological component. Chomsky's early theories on language acquisition marked a significant departure from the prevailing behavioral view that language input was the primary, even exclusive influence on language development. Chomsky's revolutionary at the time theories sparked a flood of research on language learning that have continued to this day. Some of the subsequent research has supported Chomsky's claims, but some has supported competing theories. Although the nativist syntactic model is no more complete of an explanation of language acquisition than the behavioral theory, it too has made important contributions by addressing some of the most challenging questions about language learning and by advancing our knowledge about language and language acquisition. The next model that I'll cover in this part is the semantic cognitive view. The story here also includes the featuring of white presenting scholars. I'm going to start with Lois Bloom and the words mommy sock. These two words helped Lois Bloom in 1970 to contribute to a new interpretation of child language acquisition. Bloom has observed a child using this expression on two occasions. One time, the child used the expression mommy sock to note that the sock belonged to her mother, possessive. The second time, she observed the child appearing to make a request, put my sock on mommy. Although we do not know precisely what the child meant to say, it is clear from this context that the same words were being used to express two different meanings. Observations such as these led Lois Bloom to conclude that semantics or meaning precede syntax, grammar, structure, in child language acquisition. In other words, children develop syntax because they already have something to talk about, rather than because they have the grammar to express themselves. In this case, the child used one syntactic form, mommy sock, to express two semantic functions, possessive and requesting. The semantic model of language acquisition was developed from evidence such as Lois Bloom's work, as well as from linguistic and cognitive theory. At about the same time that Bloom was conducting her observations of children, Fillmore was publishing his ideas about the role of semantics in language structure. Fillmore noted that the selection of a word to be used in a sentence is determined more by the meaning of the sentence than by the syntactic structure of the sentence. For example, in the sentence, blank hit the ball, rules of syntax tell us that the word that goes in the blank must be a noun. But semantics, or meaning, tell us that only certain nouns will do. The word boy, girl would be fine. The boy hit the boy hit the ball, girl hit the boy, girl hit the ball. But the word clock or desk would not do. Desk hit the ball, desk hit the girl. That wouldn't quite fit from a meaning standpoint. Fillmore's theory, case, grammar forced linguists to rethink their assumptions about the relationship between syntax or semantics, between form and content, if we map that onto our Venn diagrams concept map. When Fillmore and Bloom's work focused on the role of semantics in language acquisition, Piaget, at the same time, was interested in the relationship between cognition or thought and language. Piaget did not produce a theory of language development as such, per se, but his work was seen as implying that language development is secondary to cognitive development. According to Piaget, in the mid-50s, language is but one of many symbol systems. Also, according to Piaget and his associates, cognitive development, such as object permanence, must precede language development. Think for a minute about what object permanence means. That's the idea that if you had an object and you covered it up with a blanket, would the child be able to know that the object is still there, hidden under the blanket, or would they think that it disappeared altogether? So the combined influence of Fillmore's case grammar and Piaget's cognitive theories and observations by researchers such as Lois Bloom led to the development of this semantic cognitive theory of language acquisition. The theory gives preeminence to the semantic aspect of language. The theory proposes that young children pay particular attention to the meaning of things, and when they use language, they do so to talk about something that they have already experienced. In other words, the experience comes first, and then the language follows. According to this theory, syntax develops as a result of the need to talk about more and more things or experiences. In addition, certain cognitive accomplishments must take place before language can be acquired at all. As the child's understanding of and experience with the world grows, language develops as an outgrowth. Like other language acquisition theories we have reviewed, the semantic cognitive theory has some strong support. It seems logical that children will talk when they have something to talk about. We'll learn some methods in literacy instruction that really rely heavily on this idea. As they acquire more experience, they need more sophisticated language to express their ideas. In addition, there's evidence that certain cognitive development steps usually do precede the emergence of language. This theory helps explain why children tend to talk about the same kind of things, no matter what their socioeconomic background or environment. The semantic cognitive theory also has its shortcomings. While certain cognitive developments do appear at the same time as corresponding language milestones, this is not evident in language that relies on cognitive development. On the contrary, there's increasing evidence that cognitive and language development may go hand in hand, sometimes known as bootstrapping. This theory postulates that specific language skills, such as understanding the disappearance associated with words such as all gone, correlate with the accomplishment of specific cognitive accomplishments, in this case, object permanence. Neither of these developments depends on the other. They emerge from the interaction between cognition and language. Like nativist theory, the semantic cognitive model gives little attention to the role of input language. These theoretical models would have us believe that adult input matters very little, if at all. Like all other language acquisition models, the semantic cognitive model has made important contributions to our understanding of language acquisition. It's forced theorists to look beyond syntax, to consider other aspects of language, content, for example. It has also had an impact on the intervention practices that we'll learn about later in this course. However, like other models, it has contributed some pieces to the puzzle, but it doesn't solve the enigma entirely. Our next theory that I'll elaborate on before summarizing is the social interactionist theory. The social interactionist model of language acquisition is based on a simple observation. People talk in order to communicate. Therefore, the model places the greatest emphasis on communicative function of language. According to this theory, language development takes place as children learn to choose the linguistic form that will best express their communicative intent. The original impetus for this social interactionist model came from the study of pragmatics, or use in our Venn diagram, how language is used. At about the same time that linguists began to identify and classify the rules of pragmatics, psychologists and psycholinguists were observing and describing communication between parents and their children. Parents modify their speech to their young children. These modifications do not appear to be random, but emphasize features of language that focus the child's attention on a critical element in the flow of language. But this interaction is not a one-way street. Young children play an important role in conversation and interaction as well. According to Brunner, in the late 70s, adjustments in adult language, such as those described previously, are called scaffolding. By engaging in communication with their parents and other caregivers, children learn that language can be used for communication, and they indirectly pick up the structural aspects of language. Communication, especially repetitive, routine communication, makes it possible for children to hear and model adult language forms. In another view on the role of communicative interaction, Tomasello offered that usage-based theory of language development suggests or informs how language forms like phonology, morphology, syntax emerge from the use of language, from the pragmatics of language. As children interact with others, they induce the correct language form, and from the result of the interaction. Like this idea in the behaviorist model, the social interactionist model of language puts a great deal of emphasis on events that take place in the environment around the child. The milieu is a word that we use in talking about children's language development. Children learn language by being exposed to language during communicative interaction. Unlike the behavioral model, however, the social interactionist model does not claim the overt reinforcement is necessary in order for language to be acquired. Similar to the nativist model in acknowledging the role of physiological maturation in determining the level of communicative interaction handled by the child, it can also be seen as an attempt to account for both the role of the environment, nurture, and the role of biological processes or nature in language development. It has much going for it. One limitation, however, is how it accounts for the acquisition of specific syntactic structures. In other words, why do almost all children follow the same sequence of language development at about the same time? If children rely primarily on the adults and their environment for language input, then it would be logical to expect that the quality and quantity of input, and thus the child's output, would vary widely. Yet, this is not the case. There must be something else at work. The social interactionist model of language learning is relatively new with respect to the other models we've talked about so far. It's had significant influence on language intervention techniques, and today many clinicians, interventionists are emphasizing its importance in engaging children, especially for communicative purposes, in these sort of repetitive, routine interactions, rather than breaking language down into small parts and teaching each part separately. Clinicians and interventions are using indirect methods of language simulation or immersing a child in a language-rich milieu, stressing the wholeness of language, form, content, use, and the essential role of communication in the language learning process. So perhaps it's not possible, given the theories featured so far, to fully explain and account for the phenomena of language development. Although it might seem discouraging that this is where we are, it may be that the most important takeaway here is the search for answers itself. Much like life, right? As a result of this search, our ideas about language have been clarified, and the debate about language learning has been sharpened. Additionally, the search for answers has led to the development of language intervention methods and models for literacy development that we will learn more about in this course.